You talked about the paucity since World War II of military intervention. We certainly had the Great Cold War, which was really fought by deterrence. Economic warfare has been employed extensively. Do you, and I think successfully, do you think that there is more of a future of that? Do you think it has peaked? Could it be used more effectively? And would you comment generally on that?
Yeah, let me start, and then I'm going to turn it to Nick, because this is something he thinks about. Prior to World War II, so when we say economic warfare, so my first question is, well, who does it? Is it the U.S. government, the Treasury Department, or is it businesses? Up until a little bit into World War II, and then probably a little afterwards, the U.S. government did have an Office of Economic Warfare. But I think the way economics sort of developed in the latter half of the 20th century is back to this laissez-faire idea. Government doesn't get involved in the economy. And that's why I think it's largely absent from U.S. national security today. Could it come back? I think there would be huge resistance, from U.S. business and markets if the U.S. government, if the Treasury Department said, hey, Coca-Cola, you must go build a plant in Somalia. Considerable risk there that the U.S. government lets businesses decide where to invest their money. We don't have state-owned enterprises like China does or Russia does or Norway does. So the U.S. government can't direct businesses in that sort of way. But I don't know, how do you answer that question? Do we need an Office of Economic Warfare again?
It's interesting that you bring this up because the administration is moving a proposal through Congress, which has passed the Senate, to begin reconceptualizing how the U.S. deploys aid money in the direction, more of a Chinese direction, which is to take OPIC, the office, the various investment funds, and to actually make the U.S. government become an investor in projects around the world. Not to be a permanent investor, but to bridge, to take Derek's example, if in the past we would try to cajole Coca-Cola, build a plant in Somalia, if this proposal moves through and it is adequately funded, both of which are very big ifs at this point, you would have the U.S. government through one of these funds, a government fund, building the plant and then assuring the security and then selling the asset to private business to run at some point in the future. So you may see the U.S. government begin to go more toe-to-toe with China, because we're very aware now of how China uses its debt, the debt equity trap. We've just seen this in Sri Lanka, where China has taken control of a port that the Sri Lankan government borrowed to build and then was not able to pay back to China, and now China has facilities. The other question, and we are now seeing the first stages of this, is at what point does the U.S. use its dollar hegemony and access to its financial system as a stick so much that it drives people, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, to finally say, the dollar is a great currency, America is a great economy to do business with, but if they keep imposing sanctions, let's find an alternative. So, we may have, because look, the dollar is the most attractive currency in the world for people to use. It's the easiest currency to use for purposes of international trade and finance. Access to the markets in New York, access to the U.S. economy, and by extension, the ability of the U.S. to use that access for partners, to say to partners, you can deal business with us or you can do business with a sanctioned country. And, but now with the European, Mogherini here on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly said that, Europe is hitting a point with regard to Iran and preserving the Iran deal, that simply because the U.S. is going to reimpose sanctions, that Europe is now looking for ways to get around those sanctions. So if this special payments vehicle proposal gets off the ground, and again, very big ifs, who would run it, how would it be collateralized, all of those are important technical questions, but this would be the first chink in the armor of allies and partners saying maybe having an alternative to the dollar isn't a bad thing. Maybe having an international trade and financial regime whose sinews don't run through the United States isn't a bad thing. And this goes back to the conversation we had here 2 weeks ago, which is that we as Americans take for granted all the benefits we enjoy from the dollar and the status of the dollar and the low mortgage, and when Americans say, what do I care about the dollar? Well, I'm sure everyone cares about the low mortgages that they pay and low interest rates and the fact that oil is denominated in dollars and therefore there's a demand for people to have dollars. If we move to where euro and yuan become currencies in which oil is denominated, then people say, well, I don't need to hold as many dollars now because I can use these other currencies. So it's in both directions. One is we may move in a direction which we haven't in the past of the U.S. government becoming much more of an economic player as the U.S. government in the way that China has been. On the other hand, we also are running the risk of having, if we keep using sanctions the way we have, at some point countries will say, yes, using another payments vehicle is inefficient and it's more expensive, but we have no choice. And what the Europeans do in the next 6 months is going to be quite interesting. Because if this is a point where European firms say, and you have Europeans that say, keeping the Iran deal is more important than implementing U.S. sanctions. And then we say, all right, we're going to sanction you for doing that. And they say, and European firms, we've always had this, this choice, right? You'll always prefer to do business with us. And this actually goes back to your soft power question in a different way. We have not contemplated what happens when someone says, yeah, I prefer someone else over you, the U.S. Because we've always, so much of what we do in the world assumes that we are the partner of choice for security, for business, for economics.
And that's where, because it's not a benign security environment, and that's where I think, economically there's a lot of frustration, and I have to imagine that's what's driving a little of the decline in the numbers of U.S. approval on the approach to trade. But then you have, at the security front, then you have, Russia is incredibly threatening to Central and Eastern Europe. China is terrifying to countries in Northeast Asia and throughout. I was engaged in sort of a track 1.5 diplomacy discussion, and there was one of the Australians sort of commented about China's South China Sea policy. He's like, look, we're 2,000 miles away and you scare the heck out of us on these issues. And that's where I think, countries might want to sort of, go their own way, but they recognize, if you undermine the U.S. in the economic space and the security space, you can't afford to do that. Plus, I would, again, I would hope too, the thing that I guess I would be a little frustrated with these numbers is, okay, we've had 70 years of a good relationship and the last 2 change all that. I guess that's where I would sort of, my personal reaction would be a little more visceral in like, okay, the relationship was really that deep that we can't deviate from how you think we should behave. And that's where I guess I would sort of, more personally push back a little bit. One of the things, the U.S. sort of has been doing this is global interests have become national interests. And I think what, not only this administration, the previous one talked about nation building at home too. Go back to the 2000 campaign, President Bush as candidate talked about nation building at home. President Clinton talked about the peace dividend. And we saw, dramatic decline because we used to have about 400,000 troops in Europe. Today it's like 50,000 or so. And that all occurred during the 90s. So that's where I guess I would, I would sort of try to unpack a little bit of this and get beyond. But we might be living in a different age too. This age of, quick reactions and, the social media platform that uses a bird and so on.